Clemens. I'm the department chair for special education at Hinsdale Central, and I'm really excited to see a lot of parents from Hinsdale Central, and then we have some parents from the middle school as well. Alyssa Gunderson is in the back over there. She works part-time with me as the department chair, and then she also teaches. Actually, she works full-time with me and also teaches. So, but she has been to some of the meetings with us, so we're excited to see the middle school parents as well. Also, Akila Beach is one of our social workers, and she's in the back. And Jim Kupris is one of our social workers who's also joined us tonight. And Mr. Popst over there, making sure we're all on track over here. So I'm excited to have Brian King come to talk to all of you. We had the privilege of having Brian come and talk to our staff. So we had our teachers, our social workers, and we had some counselors. So we had a good mix of people. And Brian worked with us for 4 hours, and it was great because it was an interactive type workshop. I don't think it's like anything any of us have ever experienced in education. So we were really pleased. Teachers walked away saying, I really feel like I got a lot out of this, and I feel like there are things I can start doing right now. So, you know, that doesn't happen too often when we leave those workshops. But anyway, so thank you for that. Brian King is a certified licensed social worker out of Naperville, and he has brought with him Zachary, his son, who is also going to help with the presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian, and let me know if you need anything.
Thank you very much, Beth.
You guys can feel free to ask questions. If you ask them, I respond.
Again, I'm Brian King. I'm on the last leg of a head cold, so I will do my darndest to make sure my voice holds out. So far, so good. I'd like to introduce myself in a unique way by listing my credentials as a human being. I'm Brian King. I'm many things. I'm a father. I'm a social worker. I'm an author. I'm a poet. I'm a parent. I'm an ASPE. I'm a social worker, so on and so forth. Did anything about my description strike you as unusual? Or did it spark any curiosity? The ASPE part. Now, why did that strike you? Probably because you don't hear it that often?
No.
Is everybody here familiar with that term?
No.
Okay, a couple people? ASPE is a term that adults with Asperger's coin for themselves to make it a much more casual and less clinical way of referring to themselves. Because it's much easier to call yourself an ASPE as you would call yourself Irish, Italian, Catholic, whatever. But if you use the clinical medical term for yourself, Asperger's syndrome, who on earth would want to go around with that on their t-shirt? That's not a term you want to own. That's a term that is basically geared towards looking at yourself in one way, and that way is broken. Anybody here have a syndrome they'd like to fess up to? Disorder of some kind? Yes, the young man in the front row.
Well, I was gifted with his gift. Well, I've had a rough past life, but I've learned to get through and move to the future.
And one of the questions that always seems to come up is, how did I find that I was on the spectrum? And it's because of this young man right here. My oldest, my firstborn son, Zachary, when he was brought into my life, first of all, I was surprised. I'm a 20-year cancer survivor. And I was told that in all likelihood, I would not be able to father children. Well, now I have 3 boys. All 3 are on the spectrum, so I'm very consistent, not only in gender, but in neurology. And Zachary was just like his old man. He was quirky, he was eccentric, he was very curious, very intelligent. When everybody said, he's your son, all right, I took it as a compliment. I didn't realize that they were looking upon him and saying, well, each generation doesn't necessarily improve upon the previous one. So Zach was our only one for about 4 years, and we had no other point of reference. As far as we knew, he was just like any other kid. He is in that he's very special. But he's also very unique. And we didn't discover that until he entered 1st grade. Because up until that point, having me as his father, he was never really put into very intense social situations, because I just naturally gravitate away from those things. So when he entered 1st grade, as far as I knew, everything was fine. I never heard too much. About 2 or 3 months into the school year, I suddenly got a phone call from his teacher. who told me about an incident on a field trip. Now, have you heard me tell this story before?
Oh, I'm not sure if I don't remember.
Let's see if you remember it, okay?
Okay.
She called me in the middle of my workday and said there'd been an incident, and this is how the incident went. They were touring a museum, and everything was going to plan. All of a sudden, there was an unscheduled change in the itinerary. They had an opportunity to listen to an 80-year-old gentleman speak about his experience in a one-room schoolhouse. And Zachary proceeded to sit there and get very agitated as this man kind of droned on and on about his memories. So halfway through the presentation, Zachary stood up, turned around, looked at his teacher, and started screaming, "This is boring, this is terrible, I want to leave right now. This is an unscheduled change." And she said she had a hard time containing her laughter because she agreed with him. So it was at that point she realized that we needed to look a little bit more into what wasn't working for Zachary. And when she called me, she said, well, Zachary has some interesting tendencies. He tends to be the timekeeper in the classroom. He wants to know when everything is going to start and when it's going to stop. And if it doesn't stop when I say it's going to stop, he reminds me that it's time to stop and move on to the next thing. He always wants to know what's going to happen first, in what order it's going to happen. He was very meticulous in his day. And the one word that really caught my attention was when she said, if there's an unexpected change in his day, he panics. And that was the red light that went on for me. Because in my social work training, I was introduced to a lot of different human eccentricities. I don't like the term disorder. And one of them was autism. So when she was giving me all of these different indicators, I was starting to see a consistency in what she was suggesting to me. So I jokingly said, well, maybe he's high-functioning autistic. And she said, well, maybe he is. So I said, what do we do now? And she said, well, I submit some paperwork and we start having meetings, and that's how the ball started rolling. And unfortunately, the teacher decided to call me right around the time where he was reaching his saturation point in the school year. So as the school was taking its 60 days to do its evaluations, Zachary was becoming unglued. So I proceeded to be proactive and got a referral from the pediatrician to a child psychologist and then an OT who promptly identified that Zachary is on the Asperger's part of the autism spectrum. And in reading these questionnaires and filling out the questions and looking through all the data, I quickly began to wonder whether these questions were about me or they were about him. So one second. So when I was with the occupational therapist and I was answering all these questions about sensory, holding railings when going up staircases, shying away from bright lights, kind of feeling queasy in situations where there's motion, like driving a car, or if you're walking along and something moves, do you move with it? And I looked at her and I said, can I have another one of these to fill out for myself, because I think this is me too. And she said, well, didn't you already know? So it seems that she had caught on to something just when I walked through the door, that there was something going on with me that I had missed my entire life. So, long story short, by virtue of his entrance into my life, I learned why my childhood was a ghastly experience, why I didn't have friends in grade school, why I was bullied mercilessly, why when I made a wholehearted effort to be liked, to kind of join in, to be one of the crowd, I never could figure it out, and it seemed like they didn't want me. So I spent a lot of time just watching everybody else have fun. I'd sit on the edge of the playground. I found the ants marching along in a straight line into their hill far more entertaining than Foursquare. So that's kind of how I spent my childhood. I occasionally had a friend here, a friend there, and in school, my friend typically was the other outcast that nobody else would play with. So we just kind of hung out together. And all that time, for so many years, I thought there was something wrong with me. And then when Zachary came into my life and I learned all about Asperger's, I realized the problem did not lie with me. The problem lied with the lack of a fit between me and the rest of the world. The problem was that disconnect. The problem wasn't me and the problem wasn't anybody else. It was that we didn't know how to bridge that gap between each other. And another big issue I had with Asperger's is how it was framed. Because, again, you want to learn about yourself, but you want to learn about yourself in such a way that you feel good about who you are. You feel like that your purpose here is meaningful, that you have a valuable contribution to give to society. And when I was reading disability, syndrome, disorder, deficits, weaknesses, how on earth could I embrace such thinking about myself? I was a social worker. When I feel good about myself, how can I help clients feel good about themselves? How can I raise my child who's just been told about this Asperger's thing and say, well, dear son, I'm going to raise you to adulthood in spite of your disability? What kind of way is that to raise a child? I just could not embrace that kind of language. So I worked and worked and worked through my own mind to try and figure out how can I find the middle ground? How can I find the happy medium? How can I not look at myself as a broken, normal person and see myself as somebody who's whole, who just kind of happens to have this unique way of interacting with the larger world? So I basically chopped off the syndrome part, just used the Asperger's or occasionally Aspie, and I make sure I introduce myself and I throw Aspie in the middle. Because Aspie is part of who I am. It's not the entirety of who I am. There are so many things to me, so many things that make up who I am, my life experiences, the relationships I have, the education. So the Asperger's is part of my humanity. Because when you think of the autism spectrum, you can also consider autism a part of the human spectrum. Because each one of us is unique in our own way. We have our own strengths, we have our challenges. People on the spectrum have their strengths and their challenges. The only thing that makes Asperger's or autism a disorder is because the people who looked at those strengths and challenges said, there's something wrong with this profile of abilities. We don't think that it's normal enough. We think it's problematic. So we're going to judge the people with these characteristics as lower functioning, as having difficulties. We're going to call it a syndrome. Well, let's say I walked into a building on Sunday with a steeple in it, and I saw all these people. There was one guy with robes in the front, and he would say something and the whole crowd would say something back. I'd say, man, this is a whole building full of people with echolalia. People would just kind of spit back whatever said to them. And they're standing and sitting and kneeling and doing this weird ritualistic behavior, and what's it all about? What do these people call themselves? They're Catholics. Okay. So they have this common behavior, this common way of thinking and perceiving. They all, spit back what they're told. Never seen this before. I think there's something wrong with this. We need to look at it, we need to study it. Let's call it Catholic disorder. Does that make sense? Because I, as an outsider, come in and decide to place value on a set of characteristics that don't make sense to me personally because of my own subjective, egocentric way of looking at the world. I see people that I don't understand, and I immediately assume the worst of them. See how dangerous ignorance can be? So not being very comfortable with the idea of being thought of as having a syndrome or a disorder, but wanting to see myself as just another human being with my own profile of strengths and challenges, I came up with my own definition of Asperger's. And that is very simply, Asperger's is the gift of a specialized mind accompanied by challenges in skillfully working with others. Does that make sense? Don't need a whole lot of criteria. Don't need to hear clinically significant deficit. All you need to know is that I have strengths, but I also have challenges. And those challenges lie in the areas of working with and making that connection. Now, when I say working with others, I don't just mean other people. Because those of you who have the luxury of spectrumites in your life know that other typically refers to other than themselves. Ideas other than their own. They prefer and work better alone as opposed to with other people. Their attitudes tend to be more subjective versus objective. They tend to specialize more in thinking concretely and have challenges in thinking more abstractly. So far, are you hearing me describe any kind of disordered individual? I'm just talking about somebody who's good at some stuff, not so good at others.
Nobody's perfect.
Precisely. And if you did meet somebody who was perfect, how obnoxious would they be?
No one's ever obnoxious. You can't be two things.
And perfection isn't anything anybody should strive for, because what are we here for if not to grow? And once you've achieved perfection, you have nowhere else to go. So. And feel free to jump in at any time here, because I'm just content as pie to listen to myself talk for an hour and a half. But real learning takes place through dialoguing, not monologuing. So I don't want to talk at you, I want to talk with you. I want to hear what your concerns are. I want to hear what your thoughts are about what it's like having somebody on the spectrum in your life. And mostly want to hear what you think is going on in that person's mind and that person's life, so I can help you bridge that gap between you and that person. Because the only thing that really holds anybody on the spectrum back is the difficulty learning how to engage. And they all have the ability to engage to a degree, based on their strengths and challenges. So the one thing that has allowed me to really successfully bridge that gap is a lot of life experiences that brutally forced me outside my comfort zone. When I was in a situation where I did not have the luxury of choosing comfort or avoidance or denial. So I was diagnosed with cancer when I was 18 years old. It was my graduation present from high school. And when you are in a hospital where you are sore, you're throwing up, hair's falling out, you can't exactly take the transition at your own pace. It kind of hits you. When you need information, when you need concrete information, and you have doctors that are either not answering your question or answering your question with diversions or evasions or very vague answers, I just wasn't getting what I needed. And I was becoming totally unglued, constant state of panic. I would go home and put my fist through the wall. I'd have crying fits. I couldn't pull myself together. So I finally got to the point where I realized no one was giving me any answers to help me find any kind of peace or balance in the situation. So I had to figure it out for myself. So I basically locked myself in the local library for 2 years and got my hands on every book on psychology and philosophy that I could to find the mental strategies I needed to pull it myself together. And in doing so, I had to learn to look at myself and look at all those places that everybody else doesn't want to look at. When everybody else could be looking at themselves, they want to watch a TV show, or they want to read a fantasy novel, or they want to go and search the web. One of my favorite pastimes is watching my own thinking and asking myself, can I do that better? So what it's done is allowed me to gain an insight into myself that few other people on the spectrum have achieved, only because they have the luxury of not having to do so. Because they have been able to construct a life for themselves of relative ease and comfort. And unfortunately, the people around them who love them want to protect them. They don't want to see them upset. They don't want to see them have meltdowns. So they protect them. Don't require them to go outside their comfort zone. And in showing their love, unfortunately, also do them an injustice by preventing them from engaging the larger world and realizing that you can go outside your comfort zone and still be okay. I do it every day. And for whatever reason, you all have the kindness and the wisdom to sit in the back half of the room so as not to make me feel too socially anxious. No. So well, you're also closer to cookies, maybe it has more.
Yeah, let me get closer.
So at this point, does anybody have any questions they want to throw out?
I do. I was wondering if you could explain to us why our children seem to have an issue with, or a problem with their memory. I'm assuming it's a memory issue with, they can go through a whole day of school, and when they come home, I'll ask, my daughter, what happened at school? Can you name 2 things, or can you give me 2 funny things that happened today at school? and the recall is extremely hard for her. And I don't know, is that an issue with sequencing and,
It's far more simple than that. The problem isn't with the child's memory, the problem is with your question.
okay?
Your child had an 8-hour day. Your child is a concrete thinker that thinks in detail. You have asked a vague question. You did not ask a question asking for a specific detail. If you said, name something fun that happened within the first 10 minutes of your school day, she could answer your question. It's more concise. If you said, what did you learn today in math class? She could answer your question.
Okay, if I've asked her what's happened in her counseling, her social work,